On a Tuesday morning just after 9, the sun already warm but not yet harsh, an elderly woman stepped into the neighborhood grocery store with slow, careful steps. She wore a faded floral dress, a light cardigan despite the heat, and sensible shoes that had seen better days. In one hand she carried a cloth bag, patched at the seams, stitched with care, and in the other a small list written in neat, looping handwriting. She wasn't in a hurry. Life had taught her that rushing rarely led to good outcomes. She moved down the aisles with quiet purpose, picking up a loaf of whole wheat bread, a small container of milk, a few apples, and a box of tea. Each item was chosen with thought, not because she wanted it, but because it was what she needed. Every penny mattered. At the register, a young man stood tapping his fingers against the counter, eyes darting between the clock and the door. He'd been on shift since 6, and the morning rush had worn him thin. When the woman approached, placing her items gently on the belt, he gave a short sigh, just loud enough to be heard, just soft enough to pretend it wasn't meant for her. The total came to $12.87. She nodded, then reached into her cloth bag and began pulling out coins. Quarters, dimes, nickels, even a few pennies wrapped in tissue paper to keep them from clinking too loudly. She counted them slowly, deliberately, stacking them in small piles on the counter. Her hands trembled slightly, not from nerves but from age and the effort of holding herself upright after a long walk. The cashier watched, arms crossed. "You know we're not a bank, right?" he said, voice flat. A couple of people behind her shifted uncomfortably. One glanced away. Another checked their phone. The woman didn't look up. She kept counting. "I'm almost done," she said softly, her voice thin but steady. He rolled his eyes. "Seriously, coins? In this day and age?" She paused for just a second, long enough to swallow, long enough to remind herself that dignity wasn't something others could take from her unless she let them. Then she continued. Behind her in line, a man in a dark baseball cap and a plain black jacket stood quietly. He held only a bottle of water and a protein bar. He hadn't said a word since entering the store, hadn't made eye contact with anyone, but he'd seen everything. When the woman finally finished counting, $12.87 exactly, every cent accounted for, the cashier snatched the coins without a thank you, shoved her groceries into a thin plastic bag and muttered, "Next." She gathered the bag with both hands, her knuckles white from the effort. She didn't respond. She didn't need to. She turned and walked toward the exit, her steps slower now as if the weight of more than groceries pressed down on her shoulders. The man in the cap watched her go. He didn't move right away. Instead, he placed his items on the counter and waited as the cashier rang them up with the same bored expression. $3.49, the cashier said. Not looking up, the man handed over a $5 bill. "Keep the change," he said, his voice calm, low. The cashier finally looked at him, really looked, and froze for half a second. Recognition flickered in his eyes, but before he could say anything, the man was already walking away, his hands in his pockets, his gaze fixed on the door the woman had just passed through. Outside, the air was thick with the smell of warm pavement and blooming jasmine from a nearby garden. The woman stood at the bus stop bench, setting her bag down carefully beside her. She sat breathing slowly, letting the morning sun warm her face. She wasn't crying. She wasn't angry. She was just tired. Tired of being treated like an inconvenience, like a problem to be solved rather than a person to be seen. A few minutes later, the man from the store approached. He didn't sit. He didn't introduce himself. He simply stood a respectful distance away and said, "That was a lot of groceries for just coins." She looked up, surprised. "I save what I can," she said. "Every bit helps," he nodded. "You counted everyone like it mattered." "It does," she replied. "Each one took effort to earn, even if it was just from returning bottles or skipping a meal. They're not just metal. They're time. Their care." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Can I carry that for you?" She hesitated, then nodded. He picked up the bag gently as if it held something fragile. "Where are you headed?" he asked. "Just 2 blocks down," she said, pointing. "The brick building with the blue door." They walked together in silence for a while. Not the awkward kind, but the comfortable kind. The kind that happens when 2 people understand that words aren't always needed to share a moment. When they reached her building, she took the bag back. "Thank you," she said. "Most folks don't even look at me, let alone help." He smiled faintly. Most folks are missing out. She studied his face then, really looked at him. There was something familiar, but she couldn't place it, and it didn't matter. What mattered was the kindness in his eyes, the lack of pity, the simple act of seeing her. "Have a good day," she said. "You too," he replied, and with that, he turned and walked back the way they'd come. She watched him go, then unlocked her door and stepped inside her small, tidy apartment. On the kitchen table sat a framed photo of her late husband, a stack of library books, and a jar labeled grocery fund, nearly empty. But not quite. Later that afternoon, as she sipped her tea and ate a slice of bread with a thin layer of jam, she thought about the man in the black jacket. She didn't know who he was, but she knew this. In a world that often moved too fast to notice, he had paused. And sometimes that's all it takes to remind someone they still matter. Back at the store, the cashier replayed the encounter in his head. He told his coworker about the strange man who paid with a 5 and walked off like he owned the sidewalk. His coworker laughed it off. "Probably just some actor type," he said. "They're all over this part of town." The cashier didn't mention the look the man gave him, the quiet disappointment, not anger, not judgment, just sadness. That look stuck with him longer than he expected, and though he didn't know it yet, that moment, small, ordinary, almost forgettable, was about to ripple outward in ways no one could predict. But for now, the day went on. The sun climbed higher, the store buzzed with customers, and somewhere 2 people carried the weight of a single interaction, one burdened by shame, the other lifted by grace, without either of them realizing how deeply it would change what came next. The man in the black jacket didn't go far after leaving the elderly woman at her door. He walked a few blocks, bought a coffee from a corner stand, and sat on a bench in a small park, where pigeons pecked at crumbs and kids laughed on a rusty swing set. He sipped his coffee slowly, watching the world move around him, delivery bikes weaving through traffic, a dog straining against its leash, an old man feeding breadcrumbs to sparrows. He wasn't used to being recognized in places like this. That was part of why he liked them. No flash, no fuss, just people living their lives, doing what they had to do. But today, something sat heavier in his chest than usual. It wasn't just the cashier's words. It was the way the woman had held herself, back straight, eyes down, hands steady even when they shook. She hadn't argued, hadn't snapped back. She'd just endured it like she'd endured 1,000 other small indignities before. And that quiet strength, that refusal to break even when the world treated her like she was invisible, that stayed with him. Later that afternoon, he returned to the same grocery store. Not to shop, just to see. He lingered near the magazine rack, pretending to browse, while watching the flow of customers. He saw the same cashier working again, this time laughing with a coworker, tossing a candy bar to a teenager like they were old friends. Normal, human, flawed, but then an older man came through the line with a cane and a basket of canned soup. The cashier's tone shifted, still polite but rushed, impatient. "You got your loyalty card?" he asked, not looking up. The man fumbled in his coat, fingers stiff with arthritis. The cashier sighed, tapped his foot. That's when it clicked. It wasn't personal. It wasn't even about coins. It was about how easy it was to forget that everyone has a story, especially when you're tired, stressed, or just going through the motions. After the store closed, the man in the black jacket struck up a conversation with a stocker loading boxes into a back room. He offered a bottle of water, asked how the shift was going. The stocker, a college student working nights to pay rent, opened up easily. "You see that lady who comes in with coins?" the stocker said after a while. "She's been coming here for years. Always the same things, bread, milk, tea. Pays in change every time. I asked her once why, and she told me she lost everything in a bank failure back in the 80s. Never trusted them again. Said counting coins made her feel in control." He paused, stacking cans with care. "She lives alone.
Her husband passed a long time ago.
Kids moved away. She walks here even in the rain. Never complains." The man in the black jacket listened. No interruptions, no grand reactions, just presence. That night he sat in his hotel room. Not a fancy suite, just a quiet place with clean sheets and a view of the city lights. And thought about control. About dignity. About how easy it is to strip someone of both with just a few careless words. He'd known loss himself. Knew what it felt like to be hollowed out by grief. to wonder if the world still had room for you. And he knew that kindness didn't have to be loud to matter. Sometimes it just had to be there. The next morning, he didn't call his assistant, didn't send a team. He went to a local grocery store himself, different from the first, and filled a cart with things he thought she might need. Oatmeal, canned beans, fruit, sturdy bread, tea, a warm blanket, even a small potted plant for her windowsill. He paid in cash, carried the bags to his car, and drove to the brick building with the blue door. When she opened the door, she looked surprised but not startled. "Oh," she said, blinking. "It's you." "I hope I'm not overstepping," he said gently. "I just wanted to make sure you had what you needed for a while." She looked at the bags, then back at him. Her eyes softened. "You didn't have to do this." "I know," he said. "But I wanted to." She stepped aside and invited him in. The apartment was small but spotless. Books neatly stacked, a quilt folded over the back of a worn armchair, sunlight streaming through lace curtains. On the wall hung a black and white photo of a man in a uniform, smiling like he knew a secret. "My husband," she said, noticing his glance. "Navy. Came home from the war, taught high school math for 40 years. Died 10 years ago last spring," he nodded. He looked kind. He was. She paused, then added, "You're not from around here, are you?" "Just passing through," he said. "But I stay a while when something feels important." She made tea, real tea, steeped in a pot, not a bag, and they sat at her kitchen table. He didn't talk much about himself. Didn't mention movies or fame or any of the things people usually wanted from him. Instead, he asked about her life, what she liked to read, what she missed most about teaching, whether she still believed in kindness. "I have to," she said simply. "Otherwise, what's the point?" They talked for nearly an hour. At one point, she laughed, a real warm sound, and he realized he hadn't heard that kind of laugh in a long time. Not performed, not for show, just joy bubbling up from somewhere deep. Before he left, he handed her a prepaid card. "For groceries," he said. "No coins needed." She hesitated. "I can't accept this." "You can," he said. "And you will. Not because you owe me anything, but because you deserve to walk into that store and buy what you need without anyone making you feel small." She looked at the card, then at him. Tears welled, but she didn't let them fall. "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded, stood, and walked to the door. "One more thing," he said, turning. "If anyone gives you trouble again, tell them Keanu sent you." She blinked. Then her eyes widened slightly. "Wait, you're—" He just smiled and closed the door behind him. Back at the store, the cashier was restocking shelves when his manager called him into the office. A customer had left a note at the front desk. Anonymous, typed, no signature. It read, "The woman who pays in coins has more dignity in her little finger than most people have in their whole lives. Treat her like the person she is." The manager didn't scold him, just handed him the note and said, "Think about it." That night, the cashier couldn't sleep. He kept seeing her hands, wrinkled, careful, counting each coin like it was a promise. He thought about his own grandmother, how she used to save string and twist ties just in case. How he'd rolled his eyes then, too. He didn't know who the man in the black jacket was. Not yet, but he knew deep down that he'd been wrong. And for the first time in a long time, he wanted to be better, not because he was caught, but because he finally saw what he'd missed. Meanwhile, miles away, the elderly woman placed the prepaid card in the same jar that once held her coins. She didn't use it right away. She just let it sit there, a quiet reminder that sometimes, out of nowhere, the world gives you a reason to believe in it again. 2 mornings later, the grocery store opened as usual. Fluorescent lights humming, freezers clicking on, the scent of fresh bread drifting from the back. But something felt different. The cashier arrived early, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. He wiped down the counters more carefully than usual, straightened the candy display, even smiled at the delivery driver who raised an eyebrow but returned the gesture. He'd spent the night thinking, not just about the elderly woman, but about all the people who passed through his line like ghosts. The tired mom with 3 kids tugging at her sleeves, the teenager buying instant noodles on a near-empty card, the man who always bought 1 banana and a bottle of water and never made eye contact. He'd never really seen them. Not until now. Around 10, the store manager came in holding a plain envelope. "Got a visitor," he said, voice low. "Wants to talk." "In the office." The cashier's stomach dropped. He followed, heart thudding, expecting a complaint, a reprimand, maybe even a lawsuit. But when he stepped inside, he stopped short. The man in the black jacket sat calmly in a folding chair, hands resting on his knees. No entourage. No cameras. Just him. Hey, the man said, standing. Thanks for taking the time. The cashier swallowed. Are you hear about her? I am, the man said. But not to get you in trouble. That surprised him. He'd braced for anger, for shame, for consequences. But this was something else entirely. They sat. The man didn't introduce himself with fanfare. Didn't mention his name at all. He just spoke like one person talking to another. I've been in situations where I felt invisible, he said. Not because of money or age, but because people looked right through me. It hurts, not in a loud way. In a quiet, daily kind of way that wears you down. The cashier looked at his hands. I didn't mean to. I know, the man interrupted gently. You were tired, stressed. Maybe you didn't even realize how it sounded. But she heard it, and it landed. Silence filled the room, but it wasn't heavy. It was thoughtful. Do you know her story? The man asked. No, the cashier admitted. She's been coming here for over a decade. Pays in coins because she doesn't trust banks. Walks here even when it rains. Never asks for help. Never complains. She's proud. And that pride is all she has left. The cashier nodded slowly. I saw the coins and thought it was inconvenient. I didn't think about why. That's the thing, the man said. Most of us don't. We see the surface, the slow pace, the odd habit, the worn clothes, and we make a story in our heads. But the real story is always deeper. He didn't lecture, didn't scold, just offered a truth, plain and simple. Before he left, he added, you don't have to be perfect. Just try to see people, really see them. Later that day, the cashier spotted the elderly woman walking toward the store from down the street. His first instinct was to hide, but then he remembered the man's words. So he stepped outside, wiping his hands on his apron. Good morning, he called out, voice a little rough but sincere. She paused, surprised. Oh, hello, I wanted to say I'm sorry, he said, looking her in the eye. For the other day. It wasn't right. You didn't deserve that. She studied him for a long moment. Not with suspicion, but with quiet assessment. Then she nodded. Thank you for saying that. They walked into the store together. This time when she placed her items on the belt, just bread and milk, he didn't sigh. Didn't rush her. When she pulled out her cloth bag of coins, he said, take your time. And she did. Counted slowly, hands steadier than before. When she finished, he bagged her groceries gently and handed them over with a small smile. Have a good day, ma'am. You too, she said. It wasn't a grand apology. It wasn't a movie moment, but it was real. And sometimes real is enough. Meanwhile, word had started to spread, not through headlines but through whispers. A neighbor saw the man in the black jacket leaving the woman's building with grocery bags. A barista overheard him talking to the stalker outside the store. Someone posted a blurry photo on a local community page. Is this who I think it is? At the corner market? Within hours, the post had hundreds of likes. Not because of fame, but because the story resonated. People shared their own experiences. Of being judged for using food stamps, of being ignored because they were old, of feeling small in everyday places. The comments weren't angry. They were grateful. Grateful that someone with a platform had used it not for show, but for something quiet and true. The man himself stayed out of it. He gave no interviews, made no statements. When a reporter called his team, the reply was simple. He doesn't talk about things like this. He just does them. But the impact rippled. At the store, the manager held a short staff meeting, not to punish but to remind. We serve people, he said, not transactions. Remember that. The cashier started greeting every customer by name if he knew it, or with a genuine, how's your day going? If he didn't. He learned that the teenager with the empty card was working nights to help his family, that the man with the banana was recovering from surgery and on a tight budget, that seeing people changed everything. Back at her apartment, the elderly woman received a small package slipped under her door. Inside was a new cloth bag, sturdier with a drawstring and a note. For your next trip. And the one after that? No signature. She smiled and placed it beside her teacup. That evening, she sat by her window, the potted plant on the sill catching the last golden light. She thought about how strange it was that one moment of unkindness could echo so loudly, and how one act of quiet decency could echo even louder. She didn't know what would come next. But for the first time in a long while, she felt seen. Not as a burden, not as a nuisance, just as a person worthy of patience, of respect, of kindness. And somewhere across town, the man in the black jacket packed his bag, ready to leave. But before he did, he stopped by the store one last time. Not to shop, just to watch. Through the window, he saw the cashier helping the elderly woman carry her groceries to the bus stop. Saw them talking, really talking as they walked. Saw her laugh just once, a soft sound carried away by the breeze. He turned and walked away, hands in his pockets, satisfied not because he'd fixed anything, but because he'd helped remind people of something they already knew deep down, that everyone deserves to be treated like they matter. And sometimes, all it takes is one person remembering that out loud. Weeks passed and the neighborhood settled into a new rhythm, one quieter, kinder, more aware. The grocery store no longer felt like just a place to buy things. It became a place where people paused, looked each other in the eye, and sometimes even smiled. The cashier, once known for his clipped tone and impatient sighs, now kept a small jar on the counter labeled "Spare Change for Neighbors." Customers dropped in coins, not out of pity, but as a quiet way to help someone who might need it. The manager didn't make it a policy. It just happened, like a seed taking root in good soil. One afternoon, the elderly woman came in again. This time she didn't count coins. She used the prepaid card, sliding it through the reader with a calm confidence that hadn't been there before. But she still brought her cloth bag, the new one, the sturdier one, and still bought the same simple things. When she reached the register, the cashier greeted her by name. Not because he'd been told to, but because he'd remembered it from their conversations at the bus stop. She'd told him she used to teach literature, that she loved poetry, especially Mary Oliver, that she still wrote letters by hand every Sunday. "Got your tea today?" he asked, scanning the box. "Always," she said with a small smile. As he bagged her groceries, a young mother behind her struggled to quiet a fussy toddler while digging for her wallet. Without a word, the elderly woman reached into her bag and handed the child a wrapped peppermint she always carried, just in case. The child stopped crying instantly. The mother's eyes filled with relief. "Thank you," she whispered. "No trouble at all," the woman replied. It was a tiny moment, barely noticed by anyone else, but it carried the same spirit that had started this whole chain. Kindness passed hand to hand like a quiet currency more valuable than any coin. Meanwhile, the story had begun to travel beyond the neighborhood, not through sensational headlines or viral videos, but through the kind of sharing that happens over coffee, in group chats, or during late-night talks with friends. A local news segment picked it up, not focusing on fame, but on the lesson, how one act of decency sparked a ripple of change in a small grocery store. The store owner, who rarely visited this particular location, came by one day. He watched from the back as the cashier helped an older man read a label. As a teenager was offered a free banana, just to get you through the day, as the elderly woman chatted with the stalker about the weather. He didn't say much, just nodded, then quietly doubled the staff's holiday bonus that year. People started coming to the store not just for convenience, but because it felt different. Like you could breathe there. Like you belonged, even if you only had a few dollars and a list written on a scrap of paper. Back at her apartment, the woman began receiving small gifts. Not expensive things, but thoughtful ones. A neighbor left a jar of homemade jam on her doorstep with a note. "My grandma's recipe. Thought you'd appreciate it." A student from the community college dropped off a book of poems with a bookmark on her favorite Mary Oliver piece. Even the bus driver started saving her a seat near the front on rainy days. She didn't ask for any of it, but she accepted it with grace, understanding that this was how communities healed, by noticing, by caring, by refusing to let anyone disappear into the background. One Saturday morning, she sat at her kitchen table writing a letter, not to a celebrity, not to the news, just to the man in the black jacket. She didn't know where to send it, but she wrote it anyway. "Thank you," it read, "not just for the groceries or the card, but for reminding me that I'm still part of the world." And thank you for showing others that how we treat each other matters more than how fast we move or how much we spend." She tucked it into an envelope, addressed it simply to the kind man, and left it with the store manager, who promised to pass it along if he ever saw him again. The cashier, for his part, had started volunteering at a local senior center on his days off, not because he felt guilty, though that had been the spark, but because he'd discovered something unexpected. He liked listening to their stories. The war veteran who still wrote letters to his old squad, the retired nurse who remembered every patient's name, the woman who'd danced in a jazz club in the 1950s and could still hum every tune. He realized these weren't old people. They were people who'd lived full, messy, beautiful lives, and most of them just wanted someone to ask, what was it like? One evening after helping serve dinner at the center, he sat with a group playing cards. An elderly man dealt the hand with shaky but precise fingers and said, "You remind me of my grandson. He's always in a rush too. But he's learning." The cashier looked down. "I hope I'm learning fast enough," the man chuckled. "Fast isn't the point. True is." That stuck with him. Back in the wider world, the man in the black jacket had long since left town. He was on a film set in another country, doing what he did best, working quietly, treating crew members like family, buying coffee for the night security guard who missed his kids. He never mentioned the grocery store, never posted about it, but when his assistant handed him a plain envelope marked "The Kind Man," he opened it alone in his trailer. He read the letter twice, then folded it carefully and placed it in his wallet, right behind a photo of his own mother. He didn't need thanks, but he was glad she'd written it, not for him but for herself, because it meant she'd reclaimed her voice, her place, her worth, and that was the real victory. In the neighborhood, life went on. Rain fell, sun rose. People came and went. But something had shifted in the air, something soft and steady, like the hum of a well-tuned engine. The store became a place where dignity was the default, not the exception. Where a coin was just a coin and a person was always a person. And though no one made a monument or wrote a song, the change was real. You could see it in the way the cashier held the door open a little longer. In the way strangers said good morning without looking away. In the way an old woman walked down the street with her head a little higher, her step a little lighter, knowing she belonged, exactly as she was. That's how real change happens. Not with fireworks, but with footsteps, with glances, with a single moment of seeing someone and choosing to treat them like they matter. And once that seed is planted, it grows. Quietly, surely, everywhere. Months had passed since that morning at the grocery store, and the neighborhood had settled into a new kind of normal, one where kindness wasn't an exception, but part of the rhythm of daily life. The store still sold milk, bread, and tea, but it also offered something harder to measure, a sense of belonging. The elderly woman no longer walked with the same weight in her step. She still lived alone, still counted her pennies carefully, but now she did it with a quiet pride that came not from having more, but from feeling seen. She'd started writing, again, not just letters but short reflections in a small notebook she kept on her kitchen table. Things like, "Today the cashier asked how my plant was doing. I told him it's blooming. He smiled like it mattered." One Saturday morning, the store hosted a small gathering, not a grand event, just a neighbor's morning with coffee, pastries, and a few folding chairs set up near the produce aisle. The idea had come from the staff, inspired by the way regulars had started lingering longer, chatting by the bulletin board or sharing recipes near the dairy case. The woman was invited as a guest of honor, though no one made a fuss about it. She arrived early, wearing her best cardigan and carrying a small plate of oatmeal cookies she'd baked the night before. When she walked in, several people greeted her by name. The cashier waved from behind the counter, already wearing an apron that read, "Ask me about kindness." She sat near the window, sipping coffee from a paper cup, watching the room fill with familiar faces. The young mother with the toddler, the college student who stocked shelves, the retired mechanic who always bought one apple and a newspaper. It felt like a family, though none of them were related. At one point, the store manager stood up and cleared his throat. "We're not here to make speeches," he said with a chuckle. "But I do want to say this. Sometimes the smallest moments remind us what really matters. And lately, this place has felt more like a home than a store. So thank you for being kind, for being patient, and for showing up for each other. There was light applause, but no fanfare. Just nods, smiles, and the clink of cups. The woman reached into her bag and pulled out a folded piece of paper. She didn't stand. She just passed it to the manager when he walked by. "If he ever comes back," she said softly, "give him this." It was another letter. Short, this time. Just a few lines. "Thank you for reminding me that goodness still walks among us. You didn't change my life. You helped me remember I was already part of it." The manager tucked it into his pocket and gave her a gentle nod. He knew who she meant. Everyone did, even if they never said the name out loud. That afternoon, as the gathering wound down, a little girl no older than 6 approached the woman shyly, holding a drawing. "My grandma said you liked tea," she whispered. "I drew you a cup with flowers." The woman took the paper with both hands, as if it were made of glass. "It's beautiful," she said. "Would you like to sit with me for a minute?" The girl nodded and climbed onto the chair beside her. They didn't talk much, just sat in comfortable silence watching sunlight dance on the floor. Later, as the woman walked home, the girl's drawing tucked carefully into her bag, she thought about how life had a way of circling back. She'd once taught children how to read, how to ask questions, how to be gentle with the world. Now, decades later, a child had reminded her of the same things, not with words, but with a crayon drawing and a quiet presence. Back at her apartment, she pulled out her old coin jar. It was nearly empty again, but that was okay. She didn't need it to be full to feel secure. What filled her now was something deeper: connection. She sat at her kitchen table and opened a fresh page in her notebook. This time she didn't write for herself. She wrote for her great-granddaughter, who lived 3 states away but called every Sunday. "Dear one," she began. "Today I want to teach you something your teachers might not cover in school. It's about coins, not how to count them, but what they can teach you. Each one is small, easily overlooked, but together they add up. And how you treat the person holding them, that tells the world who you are." She went on to describe the cashier's apology, the shared peppermints, the way strangers had started saying hello. Not to impress, but to pass on a truth. That dignity is free, and giving it costs nothing but attention. That evening, she video called her great-granddaughter. The girl, bright-eyed and full of questions, listened as her great-grandmother told the story, not as a fairy tale, but as a lesson wrapped in real life. "Did the famous man come back?" the girl asked. "No," the woman said gently. "And that's the best part. He didn't need to. He did what was right, then let it go. That's real kindness, not for show, just because it's right." The girl was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Can I learn to count coins like you?" "Of course," the woman replied, her voice warm, "but not because we need to, because it teaches us patience and respect, and that every little bit matters." They spent the rest of the call practicing, quarters, dimes, nickels, laughing when the girl mixed them up, celebrating when she got it right. Meanwhile, far away, the man in the black jacket was wrapping up a long day on set. He'd just finished a scene, and as he walked back to his trailer, a crew member handed him a small envelope. "Came for you," he said. "No return address, but it's from back home." Inside was the woman's latest letter. He read it under the dim light of his trailer, the sounds of the set fading into the background. When he finished, he didn't post it online, didn't quote it in an interview. He just folded it and placed it with the others in a small wooden box he kept on his nightstand. A collection of quiet reminders from people who'd shown him that humanity still shines, even in the smallest corners. He thought about the grocery store, the bus stop, the blue door. He hoped she was well. He hoped the change had lasted, and in a way he already knew it had, because real change doesn't depend on one person. It spreads. It takes root. It becomes part of the air people breathe. Back in the neighborhood, the store stayed open late that night. A few regulars lingered, sharing stories under the soft glow of the overhead lights. The cashier restocked shelves, humming to himself. Outside, the streetlights flickered on, casting long shadows on the sidewalk. Life went on. But it was different now, because somewhere along the way a moment of unkindness had been met not with anger, but with grace. And that grace had grown, quietly, steadily, into something that couldn't be undone. And in the end, that's all any of us really need. To know that we matter, that we're seen, and that even the smallest act of kindness can echo longer than we'll ever know.